So far, we've covered many aspects of social media, but we've ignored the significance and potential impacts of trolls. These are sometimes often troublesome users interacting with your community or campaign and can sometimes be extremely difficult to work with at multiple levels. They may even engage in illegal activities. In order to combat this sort of behaviour, we will often engage the services of community managers. To explain the significance of this role and how to work with online communities, I spoke with one of the leading global experts of community management, Vanessa Paik. Vanessa has over 20 years' experience in the business and has pioneered the underpinning aspects of the community manager role. In speaking with Vanessa, we learn about how to work with online communities, what trolls are, and how to deal with tricky social media situations. Can you talk us through what community management is?
Absolutely. If I were to give you sort of, I guess, my textbook definition, which is probably a helpful place to start, it'd be the discipline of creating productive communities. And when I say productive, obviously that's a word that can fit any outcome, any context. So that might be a commercial one, a community set up to try to monetize and get some commercial output, or it might be a community that's set up with the purpose of giving members somewhere to come together and share stories, or it might be a community that's designed to, I don't know, get a movement or get a cause going and get a real awareness for that cause. So if that's the goal, then community management is moving the community along a journey toward that goal.
So you've got a community of users, and you've got a community manager. How are they best positioned, or what's the sort of role that they might do to encourage ethical social media use amongst that group of users?
Mm. It's a really tricky question. I'm a passionate believer in the importance and the role of ethics in social media management and in community management. The reality is a large portion of the active communities online today, particularly those that are out there in a business context, don't necessarily account for that ethical perspective. So, not that they're unethical, I don't mean that, but it's not a priority for them. I guess the community manager's role is really to be that arbiter between the community and the host organization, whatever that might be, whether it's commercial or not. And I guess facilitate. So, I think facilitator and mediator is the number one description I would use to answer your question, because it's about that constant facilitation of questions and issues, whether it's legal, governance, behavioural, how we're tracking on our objectives, commercial or non-commercial, all that sort of stuff. I think that in reality, I think businesses want a community manager that is usually there as a growth driver. Communities are set up by organisations, and look, not just commercial organisations. People generally, if they create a community of some kind, they want it to be able to grow. So the community manager has to be a growth driver of some kind. And I guess it's incumbent upon the community manager to do it in a way that's going to be ethical. And the reason that that matters isn't just for the health and safety and the experience of those members in that community. It's also to protect the organisation, whoever they might be, so that they don't get into any trouble along the way.
So how does a community manager deal with problematic types of users?
I think first things first, you need to sort of do a bit of a risk assessment pretty quickly, and that can be, just in your head on the spot. Again, it helps if you've got, depending on the scale of the community, a lot of really big communities or business-facing communities, you might have a bit of a risk matrix that you've already created in advance that sort of captures, the kinds of scenarios that are probably most likely in terms of bad behaviour or lines that are going to be crossed, and laying out the right course of action for those. That's also really important if you've got a team of people that you're working with, that everybody's on the same page for that. But if you don't have that, you just need to sort of determine, if there's, much like you would if there was an issue in offline life as well, is there an immediate threat of harm to anybody, to your community members, to yourself, or to the person in question? You need to be able to quarantine that behaviour. And when I say that, I really mean, whether that's giving somebody a timeout, whether that's removing the comment, whether it's banning that person, whether it's taking it offline, whether it's taking it to a different area of the community. There's a whole bunch of tricks you can do to achieve that. It is true that, and this is certainly the case with professional trolls, if you whack them with a stick, they tend to just get more and more angry and do more. It's sort of that whack-a-mole syndrome. So, banning and deleting wholesale is not always the right approach. It can inflame tempers more. It can get people more upset. So again, that's sort of when you need to have that conversation around and just do that bit of assessment around, is this a really serious issue? Is it a credible issue? Can I help? By posting something useful either in a direct message to this person or in a public forum to this person, can I diffuse this situation immediately? And if you can, that's always going to be your first point of call. If you can't, or if you've tried that already and that's failed and the behaviour persists, then you clearly need to go to phase 2. If we are talking about something like really serious abuse or any kind of threatening behaviour, or also any personally threatening behaviour as well, you will need to probably report that back to somebody, whether it's the person that's hired you or asked you to do that role, whether it's the authorities at some point, and they're going to need that screenshot. They're going to need that evidence. Without it, it probably makes it pretty near impossible for them to do anything.
So let's talk about where it kicks over from slightly bad behaviour towards trolling, which you sort of started to comment on there. Can you talk through sort of that spectrum, what trolling is and kind of that spectrum of the activity?
This is one of the most interesting and in a lot of ways pretty disturbing, I suppose, facts about the way that trolling has evolved. So certainly, I mentioned I was online pretty early. Of course there were trolls, but there were a hell of a lot fewer people online, so there were a lot fewer of them, it follows. And generally speaking, they had fewer tools at their disposal. And because communities were able to self-insulate more easily in that day, I would say, because, partly because they weren't as connected and as integrated, and we've seen all the great things to come out of the fact they are connected and integrated. But that also gave them a level of immunity and a layer of self-insularity. So, you could have a community off to one side, and if you pretty much guarded who was coming in and out the front door, you probably never meet a troll in your life. Whereas now, you really can't, go outside open the digital front door without running into one in some fashion or another, whether you are the personal target or not. I think, you're right. The idea of groups like Anonymous, I think that, and to me, that's really an extension of, that pretty old and not new idea of culture jamming. I think things like Anonymous are a new sort of a riff on culture jamming in a way, where you've got it's a new tactic, this sort of mass and digital mobilization thrown at a purpose or an event, whether that's a denial of service attack or a mass hack or whatever it might be, to disrupt the attention economy, right? And I think that I've made the observation before that it's oft used phrase that we live in an attention economy, and we do. Everybody's aware of that. It's commercial currency and all those sort of things. But trolls do thrive on attention, so it really is pretty logical that they would proliferate in an attention economy. I think that those two things are not unrelated. People think that the internet is a democracy, and people think that social networks are a democracy, and they have a particular idea about what that means based on where they are in the world and their individual life experience. The reality is about 80% of the internet is private, and it's run by private companies, and they're private, they're practically private land. And of course, those businesses are smart, and a lot of them genuinely are committed to, a forward-looking, open, connected kind of mission that is inherently relatively democratic. But they're not. They're not democratic institutions. We're lucky that most of them generally behave that way, but that could flip on a dime as well.
So a healthy community is great, but a healthy community can also fall victim to a few bad users that can ruin the experience for all, or even worse, commit online hate or vilification towards other members. This is where the skills of a great community manager are crucial, to navigate the tensions and negotiate between users, local community guidelines, and larger regulatory frameworks. As Vanessa pointed out, this is a tricky process that requires a specific knowledge and skill base, but is essential for developing a harmonious online community.